Welcome to the Kickstart podcast, where we highlight the stories of how professionals kickstarted and navigated their very successful careers. My name is Preston, and on this episode, we have the pleasure of hosting someone who first started her career in law before she successfully pivoted into product management in technology industry. She's now a founder that is building an app that is taking the dating world by storm. Taly, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely my pleasure. So did my best to give you a small little intro, but for those that don't know who you are, would you mind just sharing a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. So like you said, my name is Taly. I am an East Coaster. So I grew up in Philadelphia and then ended up going to undergrad in New York and then law school in New York. But clearly I've taken a few left turns. I practiced for about a year and a half before realizing I wanted to work in a more creative, innovative space. And I moved first to operations and then to product management. And along the way, I started building Blink. And I'm really excited to be working on a dating app to help people make deeper connections. I think online dating today has kind of been reduced to a transactional experience, and I'm excited to rehumanize it.
Perfect. That's exciting. We'd love to talk about Blink in a second, but you touched upon a lot of different topics I would love to cover. First and foremost, you started your career in law. I think that is super cool. And now you're a tech founder. So let's take a couple steps back. Have you always wanted to be a lawyer or go into law? Maybe perhaps your family or parents in it. Has that always been an aspiration for you?
You hit the nail on the head. My parents definitely encouraged me to follow one of a few career tracks, doctor or lawyer being the primary ones. And I decided I wanted to be a lawyer at a fairly young age. I, did all the things that one would do. I was in mock trial in high school. I studied relevant topics in undergrad. I worked at law offices and did legal internships throughout undergrad. And I thought I liked it. I thought I was going to be happy as a lawyer. But what I have learned is that none of those things really prepare you for what it's like to be a lawyer, to practice as a lawyer. And even law school doesn't really show you what it's like to be a day-to-day lawyer. And I quickly realized after graduating and starting to practice that I didn't like it. I didn't like the workflow. I didn't like the hierarchy at, law firms. I tried other things. I summered and did a clerkship. I did an internship at the Manhattan DA's office. I tried all of these different things and they just kind of left me wanting. And I knew what I was like when I was passionate about something, and none of those things sparked that passion. And so I decided I was too young to resign myself to a career that I didn't want to pursue. So I jumped ship pretty quickly.
I'm all about action and change. And if you don't like something, change it. And that's exactly what you did. And so before talking more about tech and Blink, I have to ask, so was there anything about law that you really liked?
Anything about it that I really liked? No. I think the honest answer is no. I didn't. I tried different, I liked some of my colleagues, but it sort of was, dependent on them as individuals more than it was about working with them in a legal context. So I liked them as people. So I liked the people that I got to meet through the experience, but I didn't like very much of the experience of being a lawyer. I did learn a lot. I had a really fabulous experience at some of my internships. They just weren't what I wanted to be doing with my life. And I realized there were other things that I'd rather pursue.
What I then find interesting is you pivoted not to another type of law or another different type of company within law, but you went out of law entirely. And so for someone, for example, in your same shoes that might be listening, who wants to maybe break into a different industry that they're currently in right now, what is one advice? Like, walk me through it. How did you break into tech? You mentioned that you want to do something different, something creative. Was it as black and white as, hey, I want to go into tech? Or maybe like, oh, you were perhaps intrigued about the finance world and maybe in the other industries, and then you just stumbled upon tech. Walk us through that.
I wasn't sure what I wanted to do after leaving law. I just knew that I wanted to do something different. And I had taken a year off between undergrad and law school. So I had a little sense of things that I liked and things that I didn't. And I had worked throughout undergrad and through law school. So I'd sampled different things throughout my life and my careers. And I remember the way that I got the job that I got, and I loved my post-law job, my first one, was just by talking to people. So I essentially made an exercise of, connecting with people at different companies that I might have been interested in, or using my kind of, at that point, pretty small network to connect with people. So in actuality, it was my partner's like old roommates, baseball friends, like friend who I connected to, who got me a referral to this company that I ended up getting my post-law job at. And so the lesson that I take from that is really talk to anyone and everyone who's willing to talk to you as you're looking for new career paths. You don't have to have like a concrete ask. You don't have to know exactly what you want to do. Just frame them as informational conversations. You want to learn about what they're doing, the company that they're at, their journey. And even if they're not, a connection that will, flower into a referral immediately, it could be months later that you see a role that's relevant that they have a connection to, and they can help you along your way.
Were
With
you
that said,
ever? Oh
oh,
no,
sorry.
thank you. Thank you for that. Sorry about that,
Oh
for
yeah.
cutting you off.
I was just going to say as a final note, with that said, in that process, when you reach out to people, you will get a lot of silence. Don't let that deter you. There are a lot of great people out there who will talk to you. So just don't take silence or no's or anything like that as a reason to not continue that effort.
It sounds easy talking about it, but at the end of the day, you have to back it up with action and work, right? And you have to be
Yep.
okay with rejection and failure. And so I'm kind of getting maybe like the early just learning blocks, if you will, of being a founder, because that's exactly what you have to do in the early days of a founder, reaching out to people all over again. So perhaps maybe this experience was the beginning of you developing tough skin to kind of dive right in. And exactly, right? So you came into tech, but then have you ever considered maybe a law job in tech? Or how did you stumble upon product management? Or did you consider any other roles within tech as well?
So what I first was doing was I don't know if you're familiar with sales operations, but what I was doing was legal operations at a tech company. And so it was like, it sounds like it's more legal than it really is. It really was stitching the legal team to other teams. So security, sales, customer success, and helping them along the way. It had the contractual component of I was kind of systematizing our contract database and things like that. And so the law degree was helpful in a way. But the thing that I learned through working in legal ops is that the thing I liked most was building solutions to the problem. So in some cases, part of my role involved solving legal teams' problems. And I was either hacking together a solution of my own or using a third-party solution and kind of implementing it for the team. And I just really liked that portion of what I was doing, which is why I then kind of pivoted from that into product management. So I wasn't just hacking together solutions, but actually had a team with resources to put together a more fulsome, thoughtful solution to problems.
What was the biggest difference for you or surprise of working at a tech company? Maybe, plus pros and cons that you just didn't get at working at law firms or at law companies before, legal companies before?
I mean, the pros are the flexibility. You come in and do your work. Nobody really follows you around about your schedule or anything like that. I had a fantastic manager who really, I think I worked at Netflix, and one of their cultural tenets is freedom and responsibility. And I think that's really what, for me, the tech world embodies, this idea of you are responsible for your job. You can do it in the time that you want, whatever it is that you want. You can get it done in 3 hours and move on with your day. And you have that freedom as long as you are responsible. And so I think the companies that I was at really embodied that. And so that is night and day from a law firm environment. I remember there are days at my law firm where I didn't really have anything to do, but I still had to be sitting in my office, and then work would come in at 6 and you get stuck for the evening, and you're like, this made no sense. If I just had my whole day to be free and live my life, I wouldn't be so upset about having my evening taken away. And yet there just wasn't that level of freedom in the firm context. I think there's also just kind of, cultural differences in the sense of that your colleagues, law firms are predominantly male, leadership is predominantly male. That is changing with time. And that is true in tech as well. Leadership is predominantly male and of a certain, group of people, but you see a little bit more diversity in tech than you do at firms. And that I really felt that difference in my time at both the firm and at my tech companies.
I think, first of all, amazing that you got a job at Netflix for someone who coming into tech from a completely different industry.
I was at Datadog and then Netflix, so I had another role between, but yeah, it was pretty fun.
Not to overshadow Datadog. Datadog is also a fantastic company too. So again, another company in the New York City scene that just has really great just brand awareness and recognition. So for you, just coming in as a newbie and landing jobs at Datadog and Netflix, real quick to the audience, what is one tip that you can share if people who are listening want to work at these types of companies?
What I was saying earlier, the referrals, the way that I got my role at Datadog was, again, like a friend's baseball. It was like a very random connection. And it just was kind of incredible. The person put in a referral. The next day I had an interview. Within a week I had a job offer, and I don't think I would have had that had I not had the referral. So I really think that there is power in that. But with that said, my role at Netflix, I did not have a referral. It was just a random application. So it really can go either way. But don't essentially, sort of what you were saying earlier, like you just have to put yourself out there. You're going to get a lot of rejection. You're going to get a lot of silence. But the more you put yourself out there, the less each individual bout of silence or each rejection actually like stings, because you kind of forget about them. 1 out of 100 is a much different odd than 1 out of 1. So just put yourself out there, talk to people, and don't be afraid of the silence and rejection.
I agree. It is to an extent a numbers game, right? And not putting all your eggs in one basket. I mean, it would just be absolutely incredible if you just applied to Netflix, being your first one, you get accepted and you're done. But then if that's the only company you apply to, you get rejected, then it can really feel heavy, right? Whereas if you apply to 10 other companies, you can easily now get distracted and focus on more positive things moving forward. So that is definitely something that I resonate with personally as well, and professionally. I think that's very healthy and important just mindset to have, whether you're just an executor or even a founder. You just got to keep moving forward. So Netflix, awesome. And then eventually you switched into product management. Would you just be able to share what was some of the products that you just owned as a PM? Just curious.
Yeah. So I did do legal tech product management because it was a space that I was very familiar with. I, know the users very, very well. And so what I worked on during my years as a product manager before Blank was really focused on building workflows for lawyers, for legal teams more generally. So, from the instant that a team needs a contract, it comes in through a legal team. There's a whole negotiation process with third parties that might also have other parties involved. You need approvals, all of those things. And all of that needs to get logged for all sorts of reasons. You want to know who approved something so that in a year, when somebody looks back at it, you know kind of who to turn to with questions or what precedent you can use for future deals. And so building a system that allows people to track that whole process, have it in a system so that if anyone ever has questions about where something is, they're able to check that instead of sending emails and Slacks and text messages. And then what happens to the contract afterwards? The company that I was at had an AI function that, extracted all of this amazing data out of contracts and then allows people to run reports and searches on it, which is actually incredibly powerful. So as an example, if you had a data breach at your company, do you know at the snap of your fingers who you need to notify within 24 hours, 72 hours, all of those things? Most companies don't. And so having technology like this that can really analyze your contracts for you and allow you to have access to data like that at the snap of your fingers is really powerful. So the company I was at was doing things along that vein.
How important or how big of a role did you having exposure working professionally as a product manager set you up for success when it came to becoming a founder for your own product?
I think it made a huge difference to understand how to better work with an engineering team. In my legal ops days, I was hacking my own solution, so I didn't have an engineering team, and it definitely didn't prepare me the same way as being a product manager, working with designers, understanding the flow of the entire process, checking for bugs. And I think I wish I had been a product manager longer, to be honest. But the path only took me the way that it did, and I learned a lot along the journey. I think I also learned a lot that I didn't know before about code bases and which tech stacks to use. Those are all lessons that I wish I had learned earlier.
All very, very important, just basic 101s that you need to know as a tech founder. And then so the company that you were a PM at, was that a big company or was that a small startup?
It was a pretty small startup. It was about, I think, 70 people when I joined. It's called Evisort. I think they're now around 200 probably. So they're in their almost, I think, growth phase.
What have you learned as the biggest difference of working at a company that's super small compared to, a company like Netflix? Like, was there aspects of it you liked, you didn't like?
I think
people are curious.
I think, the nice thing about a small team is that you kind of know everyone and it can be kind of fun. I think the downside is I worked at Evisort in a remote world, so I never got to enjoy the experience of, getting lunch with everyone and meeting people across the entire company. But you do still know of people in a small company in a way that you don't at a big company. I think an evil that exists across all companies that I learned, I was hoping it'd be different at a smaller company, meetings take over your life. So I don't know if anyone has mastered the balance of meetings and work time, but sadly, both at big companies and small companies, I found that was an issue.
And before I forget, what did you do at Datadog? What was your position there?
Legal ops, yeah.
Legal
So legal
ops.
ops at Datadog and Netflix before I moved into product management at Eversort.
Well, I think just listening the past couple minutes in terms of how you got into tech, Talia, I think it's extremely fascinating. It's very easy to say that with every new job or chapter in your life or in your career before you founded Blink, it was very intentional, very strategic. But for someone just who's listening to everything from a third party perspective, it almost does seem like you planned everything out. Perhaps it was coincidence, or perhaps you just kind of went with the flow and you were dealt really really good cards. But to go from an industry like law, where there's typically one thing to do. There's usually one way to do things, right? And it's very regimented processes. This is the way it's done. It's the way it's always been done. It's the way it will continue to get done. To then break into tech, but you didn't dive right into a 5-person startup as the first job in tech. You joined established companies, Netflix being absolutely massive and kind of being a really great transition from the legal industry to like a really big tech company where it still has a lot of systems and rules. And then you were able to leverage that to find success at a smaller startup where you went from legal ops to product management and then becoming a founder. It just kind of makes sense. It's almost like being a founder is something that you always want to do. Is that true? Or did Blink kind of happen maybe just out of the blue, or you weren't actually planning on starting Blink for a long time? Like, what was your thought process as your career progressed?
It definitely wasn't intentional, but I'm very happy with where I landed. I did have the idea for Blink for many years before finally taking the plunge. And so I think I had the hope, the goal, the dream to be a founder. And it just, sometimes you just got to push yourself. There's never a good time to do certain things. Like a law professor once told me, there's never a good time to have a baby. People were asking her, how did you have a baby? She was a Supreme Court clerk when she had a child. And she was like, there's just never a good time. You have to take the plunge. And I sort of see startups the same way. There's never a good time to start your startup. You're never going to be in the right place in your career or the right place financially. Maybe for some people, the stars align perfectly. But I feel like for a lot of people, it's like, oh, when this next thing happens, I'll take the leap. So from my perspective, it was just time to, push yourself over the ledge, see what happens. I did it while working my full-time day job for about 1.5 years, I think it was, before I finally went full-time on Blink. And so I think that's something that is not beloved in the tech industry, but I would definitely encourage people who see that as a way that they can dip their toes in the water and get started as a way to explore kind of becoming a founder on their own terms. But to answer your immediate question, I do think that it was something that was in my cards. It was just a matter of when it was going to come up.
I just thought it was an interesting observation. I think that if you or anyone listening who wants to be a founder, it's priceless to have exposure to working at companies at different stages and sizes because you learn so much. And then when you decide to go on yourself, or kind of bet against yourself, you can really leverage those skills and experiences to hopefully help you kind of avoid common mistakes or pitfalls. So you were a PM, and you told me that Blink was an idea that was simmering for quite some time. What inspired it? How do you go from legal to legal ops to then joining a legal startup where you're doing product management into something completely different, which is building an app? Dating. It's not legal dating, it's dating, right? So
just dating.
What was your thought process there? What inspired you? And I also, for the record, Taly, I just love how you mentioned that you did this on the side. I think to your point, the great thing about tech is there's so many different ways to get to the top of the mountain. And even though a lot of people, and there's some sort of understanding with the industry to be a founder, you really have to put in 200%. You can't have another job at the same time. A lot of people will start part-time as well, and there's nothing wrong with that. So what was your inspiration to Blink, and then what exactly did you do part-time? Did you hire an engineer? Maybe did you hire part-time engineers to build an MVP for your app? Would love to just kind of hear like the early stages of company.
So in terms of the inspiration for Blink actually came from eating at a blackout restaurant and talking to strangers in total darkness, having no idea what they looked like. And I just had an incredible evening. I ate at this restaurant thinking it was just going to be like a dining experience. You eat in the dark. What is that like? But really it changed my perspective on the process of getting to know people. And in, today's era, we're making judgments about people in the grocery store, in the books, like, out and about when you're driving around and you look over in the other car. And in dating in particular, statistics show people are swiping in less than 1 second, and they're making decisions based solely on attractiveness and race. And that isn't to say love is blind. It absolutely is not. But love is a little bit blurry, and we're not giving love a chance to blossom. We're not giving ourselves a chance to see if there's a connection with someone, because we're making assumptions about them as people. And they're making assumptions about us. And so by removing the kind of profile-based, swipe-based interaction as that first one in the process of dating, we can actually make deeper connections and find more compatibility with people. And so I've had this idea in my mind for years, since having this experience and talking to these people in the dark, and realizing I would have never had that connection with them had I seen them beforehand, because I just would have assumed we were different people and wouldn't have had a ton in common. And it's a shame. So I wanted to build this idea for so many years. And in March of 2020, right around the start of the pandemic, I started thinking about doing it in a live event format, but then the pandemic hit. And I quickly pivoted to the idea of building it as an app, because it would be so much more scalable. And in hindsight, probably could have done a lot of things more efficiently. But at the time, what I had done was looked for people I could work with, eventually settled on working on with a dev shop to build an MVP. The process for that took a lot longer than it should have in reality, for all sorts of reasons, COVID being one of them, but really it still took a lot longer than it should have. And so in hindsight, I might have gone with, potentially a low code solution or some other, method. But the early days were kind of comprised of, I made some early wireframes in Whimsical. They looked ridiculous, like they should never see the light of day. Worked with a dev shop to make the MVP, a lot of kind of meetings and working through the design with them, the actual functionality, working through issues with the development process because of COVID and all of that. And yeah, just at that point, I started a little bit of marketing in terms of getting people on a wait list, but have since moved. So was marketing in Los Angeles at the time, but now I'm in New York. So, the life of a founder is never as simple as, focus on one thing. There were a lot of different things in the pot at the time, and I can't remember all of them at the moment.
What about fundraising? Were you able to raise like a friend and family round or a pre-seed or seed round throughout the process?
In the earliest days, I think it was in like October of 2020. So about 6-ish months after I first was like, okay, let me take the leap. I did a small Kickstarter and was able to raise a little bit of money through that. None of the other fundraising happened through 2021. The first funding that I received was in 2021, January of 2022, this year, which is when I went full time. And so for about a year, was just bootstrapping and kind of self-funding, and did win one grant, which was really fabulous. So that's another thing that people can kind of apply to if they're interested in the founder life, but don't necessarily have the capital to do it up front.
But then early this year, you mentioned that's when you raised your first round of funding. And then you also quit early this year as well in terms of your PM job. Wow. So now you're completely in it, consumed 24/7. And so where are you with the roadmap right now with the product?
Yeah. So in January to June, July, I did a beta in Los Angeles, which is where I originally was when I built the app, but I'm now located in New York. So I decided there was too much friction in marketing from New York to Los Angeles. I decided it wasn't really worth that anymore. And as much as it made me sad to close the LA beta, I decided to do that so that I could focus on launching in New York. Makes the effort of reaching people a lot easier when I'm in the place where I'm doing the work. And so for the past 2-3 months, been focusing on gearing up for a New York launch, have a few developments on the app, a few enhancements set up before the launch. So things like geofencing to make sure that we're giving people the best possible experience, and some additional filtering. So we learned a lot from the beta in Los Angeles. So just kind of gearing up for that. These past few months have been full of marketing, really.
That's exciting. And what sort of, for someone who is super early, doing whatever you can to further progress the development of your product, what sort of like marketing methods and channels have been like really instrumental or helpful to help you just at this stage of your company?
For me in particular, I found that doing sponsored events are most effective. And when I say sponsored events, essentially finding events that you align with, that you can tap into. And so you might pay a small fee to be a sponsor for the event, you get to join it, and then, reaching people in whatever way you can as through some sort of activation at the event. And the reason I find these to be most effective is that people remember human a lot better than they remember an Instagram ad, and somebody meeting the founder of a company is a lot more meaningful than them seeing something, in their story feed. And B, you're getting the word out in a way that's kind of more memorable to people. people and you're meeting them where they are. And you're kind of you're also getting to talk to people, hear their feedback, hear their reactions, understand what marketing messaging is working, what isn't. And it's also very low cost in the sense that you no longer need to worry about the promotion because you're tapping into an existing event. You're just kind of showing up and joining it. And so it reduces a lot of the pressure and kind of on the limitations of bandwidth of a small startup. I think it could be different for a startup that might be in a more what's the word I'm looking for? Like in a space that isn't so crowded. Mm-hmm. So if you're the first of your, kind in your space, then by all means, doing some Instagram ads, doing all of these things online, that can be very effective. In the dating space, it's so saturated that, an ad for us is, what's going to differentiate us from an ad from Bumble, Hinge, all of these other dating app startups. And so for me, I didn't find those to be terribly effective. So it does vary, I would say, but for me, events and sponsoring them and kind of tapping into existing things around the city have been pretty effective.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty effective strategy. And how big is your team right now? Is it mainly still you? Do you have a lot of like freelancers, part-timers, full-time folks?
Yeah, so I'm the only full-time employee, but I do have a lot of help from various people. So I have some designers and engineer folks from my past lives helping me with various things. I have a part-time developer based in Brazil, and he's fantastic. I've got some people from my Netflix days helping with marketing. And so all sorts of various places where I'm getting help from people. And hopefully one day I'll be able to expand the team officially from one to more. And also interns. So the interns that we have on the team are really fantastic as well.
I want to thank you for just talking about this so openly. I think it's very easy for founders to almost have a little kind of built-in level of ego, if you will, or pride, and just uncomfortable talking about this. But I think this is really important and really great that you're able to share this. It says a lot about you and as a founder, but also I think it's very insightful for the audience. You have to do in the beginning just whatever it takes to get your company off the ground. And it's not always as easy as I have an idea. I'm going to raise a $3 million seed. I'm going to hire my first 10 people W-2 and then raise a $10 million Series A and then just ride off into the sunset. Like it just doesn't happen like that.
No.
Right. I mean, it'd be incredible if it did, but like, I think what you're going through and people who are familiar with tech, or maybe not so much, but you hear a lot of words and buzzwords that a lot of big founders use, like lean and scrappy, fast-paced, agile, pivoting. Like you're going through that right now and trying out new channels. And if it doesn't work, you just got to pivot and try something else and just do whatever you have to. And the fact that you started in LA and then you moved to New York and now you're making progress in this city, I think is awesome. I think dating, like you said, extremely competitive, extremely saturated. So even after all this time, Taly, when you went all in and you see the big competitors out there, are you now still just like the fire is hot? The passion is there. You see all the OG apps there, but then you still see this vacant space that that your product can fill, providing a completely different experience and perspective in the dating game. Is that still kind of rock solid and strong for you?
Yeah, there's a huge gap. Everyone complains, like Tinder is one of the most downloaded apps. It also has one of the worst NPS scores. Like people are not happy with the options that are out there. And it's just a matter of time until a better thing comes out for people to actually start using. And there is a challenge in dating in particular, in any marketplace where you need to have both sides of it and you need to have sufficient volume. We have a really great advantage in that in synchronous communication. We don't need the same threshold of users as something like, that's profile based. And so I think we do have a lot of advantages in our favor. And I do think we can get there and fill that gap, but it's daunting. There, like you said, like there's Tinder, there's Bumble, there's Hinge. There are these companies with, millions of dollars behind them that have huge marketing budgets. And we're trying to, we're that scrappy underdog that's trying to get in and say, hey, you want something better, we have it. And, we just got to get in front of enough people who can hear us and try it out.
For people who are unfamiliar with just the dating apps in general, you said that you need to drive a lot of volume within the app, or it's a market, you need to have a certain number of threshold of users. What does that mean? So obviously, if people who are listening, if you know of dating apps that use it, you know that, technically the apps exist, it connects people to people, right? So does that mean that you have to have a certain number of users on the app before you launch? Is that kind of the main goal for you at this point?
That is the main goal, and it is a big challenge. Like I was saying, though, we have an advantage in that, and that our threshold isn't quite as high as something like Tinder or Hinge or Bumble. Anything that's profile based, where it's asynchronous, people just want something to swipe through, right? When they're in line at the grocery store, when they are out walking their dog, they want to have something that they can swipe through mindlessly. Our app doesn't have profiles to swipe through, it sets people up for 10-minute dates. And so it's much harder to go through the user base in a short amount of time, because you're actually setting up a date and talking to someone. It's only 10 minutes long. It's super quick, but that means our user base doesn't need to be quite as large as something that is profile based, because it's based on synchronous communication. So we do have an advantage in that space.
So let's talk about flow for prospective users. So what are you envisioning if when someone signs up for your app, then they have to create some sort of profile, and then are you going to take them through a series of questions for the algorithm to get to know the user, for them to be able to further be matched using some sort of algorithm or machine learning component to a variety of other profiles? Is that kind of the basic strategy there?
Yeah, so the basic flow at this point is super simple: age, sexuality, location, a few lifestyle choices like family planning, religion, things like that. And based on that, and when people are free, that's how we set them up for dates. We do plan to enhance that further, so that as you continue dating and we see the things that you like and don't like, we can also kind of filter up different, people who match the things that you're interested in. So if you seem to really like people who are funny, and we know that certain people are funny based on their interactions with other people, we're able to then more smartly match people for their dates. So with time, our algorithm will get smarter. So yeah, but in these early days, it'll be fairly straightforward and easy for people to kind of indicate the things that they're interested in and get matched.
What's the biggest difference of existing dating sites where you sign in, you do the same thing, age, sex, location, preferences, and then you get matched? What's the biggest difference between what's existing today and then what your early version will do?
The big difference is on those existing dating apps. When you sign up, then you're in this portal and it's like, okay, here are 50, 100, however many people. Now go swipe and tell us who you want to match with. And you're swiping and you're, messaging and you're texting and you're coordinating and you're going through all of that process whenever it is that you open the app, whenever it is that they do, and you're kind of coordinating in that way. On Blink, there's none of the swiping. You create your profile and just tell us when you're free, and we schedule you for your dates. And when the date comes, you join the app. After the date, you tell us how it went, and only after that are you really matched. And so a match on Bumble or Hinge is going to be a match based on a profile. A match on our app is an actual conversation and photo. So you know that there's substance and physical interest. And so our matches are more qualitative than they are quantitative. So that is kind of a big difference between the experience on other dating apps versus Blink.
Can people refuse a match on Blink?
They could refuse a match. So if your conversation doesn't go well, you would just say, I'm not interested. And if you aren't interested after seeing photos, you say you're not interested. And that's sort of the essential refusing of a match. Or if you match with someone, you're messaging with them and then you don't want to continue, you can still kind of, unmatch with them.
Gotcha. But the first touch is to have some sort of like a dating experience based on the profile and photos.
An actual conversation.
Gotcha. That's super cool. And so like how, once the app goes live, like how would users have to pay out of pocket for anything? Is it like a one-time fee? Is it a monthly fee? Would they just easily be able to sign up through the app? Like how would that work?
Super easy to sign up. We will launch with just a free model. Eventually we'll have a subscription model where we'll have premium features. People can get that either on a monthly basis or one-off if they want to have certain boosts. And so we'll probably introduce that, I'm hoping, first quarter of 2023. Goodness, that's right around the corner. But yes, in the early stage, it'll just be free and people can download the app from the App Store, Android, Play Store, and sign up and dive in.
Cool. And for people who are like, wow, I think this sounds really cool. Maybe perhaps like they experienced the same thing going to one of those blackout dinners and like, oh, this is actually a really cool experience. And maybe someone will create an app about it that we're talking about right now. If they're like, wow, I actually really resonate with the mission, and maybe one day I would love to join Taly's team as you guys continue to grow and scale. Do you know like what would be maybe like the first couple positions that you might want to hire for in the future? And how would people be able to kind of learn about them?
Yeah, the first roles that I likely will hire for will be a marketing role. It's just super important in this space, something that also kind of revolves around branding. So not just acquisition, but also community. Dating can be hard. We want people to feel like it is a welcoming space. And beyond that, the other role that I'd love to hire for is a full-time engineer. The part-time engineer I have right now is fantastic, but I'd love to be able to have someone who's in-house, really committed to building Blink and making it the next great dating app that everyone uses and talks about. And so how people can learn about those things, we'll probably have that on our website, but we'll also post them on LinkedIn. So folks can follow Blink, or they can follow me because I likely will post those things on my LinkedIn as well.
I love it. And do you foresee your team being fully remote or maybe hybrid or localized in New York City?
I do see it being fully remote with a concentration in New York, particularly from the marketing perspective, because there is so much that's localized, so much that also just knowing the city, knowing the neighborhoods, knowing which areas are best to tap into. There's an ease about that when you are based in a city rather than not, but I don't foresee having an office. And so I think kind of regionally focused in the New York area, but likely remote, and hopefully eventually we'll be able to have offsites. I know, like, I'm hopeful for a world where we can live that kind of virtual and real life hybrid kind of in tandem and in peace. I know now it's this weird moment where we're still trying to figure out what everyone is doing.
What is it like? Just what are you seeing in terms of, as we're shooting this right now, Taly, we're going through a very, very unpredictable just economy in the market, and things change constantly. So for someone that's scrappy and trying to be lean and building in this market, like what are you seeing? Does it phase you, or are you just so focused on what you have to accomplish that it doesn't really affect you so much? Or are you kind of thinking about it perhaps in the back of your mind that if you do need to scale, hire people, raise more funds, some of those could be impacted, maybe perhaps increase in difficulty on certain levels? Like, how are you feeling and what are you thinking about that?
Yeah, I definitely am the type of person who stays uber focused. So these things are sort of in the back of my mind more than forefront. But they are things that can kind of inform which direction I'm going. So for example, earlier this year, I thought I might pursue VC funding as kind of a pre-seed round, but as the market changed over the summer, realized that would be a much harder hill to climb, and plan to kind of target primarily angels in this next round, and do an angel round before doing a pre-seed. And so they do change some things from a strategic perspective, but they aren't changing my day-to-day. They're not changing kind of my effectiveness in getting things done, because I'm able to kind of put them on the back burner. And so I do think one thing that's super valuable in this climate, in this moment, is being able to make decisions quickly, iterate quickly, fail quickly, change and kind of experiment as quickly as you can, because you never know what else will change and how the climate will look in a month or 2 months. So it's only so helpful to make plans, long-term plans. So I try to stick to short to medium-term plans and try to remain agile in that regard.
And so for people who are excited about your app, what is the next kind of biggest milestone that you're shooting for? Around what time or time of year?
Yeah. Mid-November is the target launch for New York. And so really excited for that. It's about 5, 6 weeks away. So keep an eye out. If people want to sign up for the wait list, they can go to our website, theblinkdate.com, and sign up, and then they can stay tuned.
That's exciting. And I guess for people further down the line who perhaps want to join you, are there any certain things about people's backgrounds that you naturally gravitate towards? For example, obviously, like yourself, you pivoted into this industry from an industry that's completely different. So would you have maybe a softer spot looking at people who've come from non-traditional backgrounds like yourself in tech? Because I know that this is also very dynamic conversations happening. Some hiring managers don't like that, unfortunately, and others are fine. Or, are you looking for certain types of life experiences or experiences with certain types of companies, so that if people were to apply or hit you up, they can, of course, asterisk that and make sure it's on the top and clear font to highlight for you?
I definitely err towards looking outside the box, because so many people did it along my journey when I was transitioning out of law, when I was transitioning to product. I was not a typical candidate, and people gave me a shot. And I think there's so much value to candidates who are atypical because they have such a different perspective. That isn't to say there's anything wrong with following the normal track either, but I am not of the mind that you need to have certain things on a particular, like on your resume, in order to be qualified for a job. Obviously, if you're applying for a marketing director role, you at least probably have some marketing experience, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have to follow an exact path that is kind of chartered for you in the industry.
But I guess, I think people have already got a pretty good understanding or semblance of the answer to this question. But for someone, as a founder right now of an early stage company, what does your day-to-day look like?
Yeah, so my day-to-day these days is very marketing centric. So I take a lot of meetings with people who I could potentially do events with, doing meetings with the team that's helping me with all the marketing work. So like I said, I have some folks from my prior lives. I do have some meetings on the product and design side. I only have one a week though, so that's been pretty efficient, being able to kind of plan forward for the launch. Really all things marketing. So partnerships, events, preparation. Tomorrow I'm going out to Columbia's campus to do some tabling at a flea kind of event that they're doing. So every day is a little bit different, but my focus these days is on marketing, and I anticipate that changing slightly with time once there is a launch, doing more customer conversations, interviews, more product and design work. But right now, really leaning into the marketing portion.
So it's a little bit of everything.
A little bit of everything.
With a heavier focus on marketing.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, I think it's so cool. I think it's very easy to glamorize our industry and then to look at successful founders today, thinking all they do is just strictly focus on leadership and management and sitting on their chair or throne, if you will. But I think a lot of them got to where they are by doing exactly what you're doing right now, right? Being scrappy. And I think this is a theme that we've seen even through your early career, where you just weren't afraid to put yourself out there, to face rejections, to develop thick skin. And I think these are like really important qualities that you just need to have or learn to develop as fast as possible if you want to work for yourself. Because if you are afraid of rejection and afraid of failure, you're just not going to go anywhere. And I think it's super cool that you're able to use this energy, this mindset to get out of law, get into tech, to then get out of Datadog and Netflix to small startup, and now, trailblazing. And I know that there's thousands of things that you're probably doing right now. It can seem exhausting, but it seems like for someone that wasn't in tech just, a few years ago, like it seems like you're just off and running, and you just kind of systematically set up your career to kind of develop these different skill sets to help you kind of become the most impactful founder. So I really want to, thank you for sharing. I think it's really, really insightful and really cool. Thanks for giving me a space to share it. So I guess one way that we love to end these podcasts is just to ask you, so if someone were to maybe follow in your footsteps, right? And would hope to kind of be a founder one day, what is maybe one advice that you want to give to people who want to do the same thing? So besides the advice of being, developing a thick skin and, taking rejection and failure in stride, I think another thing that I mentioned briefly, but would really highlight is make decisions quickly. Sometimes you might, and as an example, like I was saying with the development shop I used to build my MVP, it took a lot longer than it should have. And I probably should have pulled the plug with them sooner. There are all sorts of reasons I didn't. And, it is what it is. Looking back, hindsight is 2020. But I think the lesson I've learned from some of these instances is that sometimes, something isn't working. Sometimes, you need to change something. And you're like, oh, let me just give it a little longer. Let me see. I have all these other things going on. It's better to just pull the plug earlier in some instances. And, it might cause a little churn. It might complicate things for a short time. But when you are a startup, you don't necessarily have a ton of time. And so moving quickly is really valuable. And so if something doesn't feel right, if you know that you need to make a change, do it quickly. I love that. Speed is everything, right? Speed is the name of the game. I said I was gonna finish, but what you said just reminded me of one more question I just have to ask. So I loved how you talked about dev shops. I think when you are not a technical founder or you're not an engineer, you have several different options of creating your MVP, right? Dev shops, outsourcing. You can, of course, if you have the resources, hire someone full time, or even go international, freelance, contract. What is your overall experience been with Dev Shop? I know that you said that it took a lot longer than expected. I've heard stories of the same. I also heard stories that it's a lot more expensive than initially expected as well. And then I also heard stories that people just swear by Dev Shop. So if you were to go back in time, would you have gone the same route, or maybe found another Dev Shop, or would you just have perhaps gone with a couple, maybe part-time or freelancers? I would have gone with one of the low to no code tool solutions. I would not repeat what I've done. That isn't to say dev shops can't work, but in my instance, it really slowed Blink down, and the product development cycle took embarrassingly long. And there, I don't think that it has necessarily anything to do with me not being a technical founder. Again, there are all sorts of factors that played into it. I do think one piece of advice I would have is for folks is to try to at least have a technical advisor. It doesn't need to be someone who's a formal technical advisor. I currently have someone who's sort of an unofficial one. He's from my former day job, and he answers questions and helps me and will sometimes do interviews for me. And he's doing it because we had a great relationship and he's a great person. And so one thing that I struggled with is that everyone's like, oh, you need a technical founder, or you need this type of person on your team. You need that. You don't necessarily need exactly what people expect. You need a version of it that works in your scenario. And so if you have someone in your network who can help with design, with marketing, with
engineering, with just technical questions, lean into that and don't be afraid of it. And so on the vein of the MVP and the dev shop, I definitely wouldn't repeat it. I didn't have all the resources then that I do now, but have definitely learned a lot along the journey that I'm trying to carry with me as I continue the journey.
Of course, and you'll continue to learn so much more. But I think just to continue on that vein, I think it's really within that VC space are the people that they really want to see some sort of technical founder. But even before that, I completely agree. That can look like something completely different for depending on the business and the team and the company and whatever situation that you're in. And it doesn't always have to be a full-time engineer or full-time co-founder. And so I just am grateful that you're providing an alternative perspective to just the main narrative out there and giving just a real kind of snapshot of what it's like to be an early stage founder and just working and just making it happen day by day. If people want to reach out to you, where can they find you?
They can find me on LinkedIn. I'm sure the spelling of my name, I won't spell it out now, but will be, I imagine, somewhere in the show notes. But they can find me on LinkedIn, Taly Matiteyahu. They can also shoot me an email. I'm at taly@theblinkdate.com. I'm super responsive to emails, so it's probably the best way to reach me.
Well, Taly, this has been great. I am personally excited to see your app continue to develop. I'm excited for your launch in November. Hope you guys also throw a fantastic party. And for people who are just listening, who resonate and vibe, please reach out to Taly. If you're looking for that special someone in your life, obviously hit Taly up and her new app in production. Sadly, I will not be a short-term user of your app, but I will hope to see a lot of the great press and users and reviews of it. So Taly, again, just really want to thank you. I think it's always refreshing to hear just the early stages of a company and what you have to do to get it off the ground, to get it moving, to really develop that momentum. And it sounds like, you're doing a great job. And I think a lot of the skills that you developed through your career, the scrappiness, the being able to make decisions quickly and pivot quickly, move, execute fast, like all of these things, especially if you're in tech, you hear constantly, but it's really true. Like these things are really important as a founder. You will live or die by these things. And so it's great. It's great that you're able to do this in, I think, one of the most difficult economic conditions, starting with 2020 and now 2022. So I always tell people, if you can build in this market, you can build in any market. So I think everything you've done, from developing thick skin, the corporate side in law, and now in tech, and now working for yourself, I mean, there's no reason why you can't keep pushing and developing something awesome. So just want to thank you again. And people who resonate with this, resonate with your mission, and are sick and tired of all the existing OG dating apps, and they want something different, please reach out to Taly. And she's awesome, super accessible, and very responsive. So thank you again. I'll leave you to it. I know there's a lot to do, but wishing you much success. We will certainly keep in touch, and I will be rooting for you from the sidelines.
Thank you so much for having me and for all the kind words. Thank you.
Thanks, Taly. Have a great day.